WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arbitrarily detained by Sweden and the United Kingdom since his arrest in London on 7 December 2010 as a result of the legal action taken against him by both governments. The expert panel called on the Swedish and British authorities to end Mr. Assange's deprivation of liberty. I think the recommendation is quite clear. Respect his physical integrity and freedom of movement, and afford him the right to compensation.
Okay, there you go. That was Christophe Pouchot at the very top with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention way back in January, February 2016. And then those photos were of our two special guests today, Mr. Craig Murray, the former ambassador from the UK to Uzbekistan, also Poland, diplomat in Western Africa, the author of 3 tremendous books, Catholic Orangemen in Togo, Murder at Samarkand, and of course his epic Sikander Burns. He's also a whistleblower and a whole bunch of others, journalists, and an ex-political prisoner. Joining us also will be the great human rights crusader, attorney, civil rights attorney, environmental attorney, Steve Donziger. He's in New York City, I believe. I don't know. Craig's in Scotland. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico Live on the Fly with a special season 7 finale of Assange Countdown to Freedom. So we're going to take a quick break and come back with these two distinguished gentlemen.
When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful. A miracle. Oh, it was beautiful, magical. And all the birds in the trees, they be singing so happily. Oh, joyfully, oh, playfully, watching me. But then they sent me away, teach me how to be sensible, logical.
Okay, we are back. I am Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico Live on the Fly. I'm going to throw it to you first, Craig Murray. I read your article that you did on Steve Donziger, and I think this is the first time you have been on the same show with him. I've tried to get you two together before, and here you go. What sparked your interest in Steve's case?
It's just a quite astonishing example of judicial, I would use the term corruption. It amazes me that an oil company can pollute the Amazon basin, can lose cases, be supposed to pay compensation, and then can go after the opposing lawyer and have them jailed for having taken you to court over all that. I mean, that a lawyer can be jailed for that in the United States is, to me, absolutely astonishing. And I don't know a single person who has read the story who is not absolutely astonished by it. Absolutely astonished. Everybody I've spoken to, as soon as they start by saying it cannot possibly be true, but it just can't have happened. That cannot be true. Then once they research the story, people go through incredulity and then into anger. And that is the universal reaction. People are very, very angry about what happened to Stephen.
Steve, when you saw Craig's article, did you know who he was at the time? I know when you're in the kind of situation that you're in, it's very understandable to be totally focused on your case and nothing else, because your freedom's at stake, and it has been for until recently 900 days in your house and another 50 days, I believe, inside a federal minimum security prison. What did you think when you saw Craig's article?
Well, first, thanks, Randy, for having me. Craig, it's an honor to appear with you, and I'm just so happy to meet you, even if it is in this electronic way. And I thank you also for the work you've done to support me in the article. I was thrilled with the article, and I know I did not know who Craig was at the time. Of course, I immediately figured it out and learned about his story. And, I think part of the challenge here for those of us who deal with this stuff, Craig and myself and many others, is to maintain contact and be in solidarity and understand that what's happening is a trend. It's not just, these are not isolated examples of a problem. They are all representative of a trend that I would describe as corrupt. I agree with Craig. Judicial corruption in response to pressure from corrupt governments and corrupt corporations. In my case, Chevron. I think in Craig's case, the government of his country. So, I think it's really good to be on the show here with such a distinguished person, and I'm just thrilled.
Craig, you made a comparison in that article. You made this connection, the Ecuador connection with Steve and the Assange case. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, that's true. I think that the change of regime in Ecuador from a government which was genuinely focused, I think, on doing in difficult circumstances what it could to actually help better the condition of the population of the country, to unfortunately, even without a change of political party, falling into the hands of essentially a typical CIA client regime. That had, that obviously had an effect on Stephen's case and the attitude of the Ecuadorian authorities, his work on behalf of the common people of Ecuador, exactly as it had on Julian Assange's conditions in the embassy and the eventual decision to remove him from the embassy. And we should never forget to hand over all of his legal documents to the American government, which still continues to astonish me. Of all the many astonishing things about the Assange case, the country that is trying to extradite him, the party that is going for the extradition, has all the legal papers of the other side, having acquired them illegally. The fact that hasn't led to the case being thrown out, to me, tells you everything you need to know about judicial corruption.
You also mentioned in there, and I'm going to ask you about this, Steve, the fact that they wanted Judge Kaplan. This is written here in this article by Craig. Go to craigmurray.org.uk and you can see it. Judge Kaplan wanting you to give over. I think this is the most astounding thing about your case, your material over to Chevron's lawyers. Is that totally unprecedented?
Yeah, under the circumstances, it's totally unprecedented. I mean, basically, let's go back in time. My case started in 1993, and Chevron sued me for $60 billion in 2011 after we had won a $10 billion judgment against them in the courts of Ecuador, where they wanted the trial held. I'll mention a judgment that's been affirmed by the Constitutional Court of Ecuador and the Supreme Court of Ecuador and the Supreme Court of Canada. So we had this judgment Chevron didn't have a leg to stand on, so they did two things. They tried to harass me procedurally by getting Judge Kaplan, who was, not a real judge, but I would describe as a kind of a corporate clone. He had previously represented the tobacco industry, and they got him to order me to turn over my entire universe of documents up to that point. In other words, there were hundreds of thousands of documents that I had accumulated, case documents, confidential documents between 1993 and 2010 when he issued this order. And the justification for issuing the order was that I had waived all my privileges by not submitting a privilege log when I filed my motion to quash the Chevron subpoena. It was crazy. And no one had ever heard of such a thing. So as a result of that, at the time, I gave them all my documents. Chevron got everything, every little piece of information we had ever, attorney-client work product, all sorts of stuff. They got insight into our thinking, into our strategy, into the identities of people who were vulnerable, who could be killed. I mean, it was unbelievable. I was advised by my lawyers that I had to turn it over, and legally under U.S. law, I did, even though it was totally corrupt. I did turn it over. Actually, excuse me, we appealed it. His order was upheld on appeal. I turned it over. One thing led to another. We ended up surviving that, and years later, he again ordered me to turn over all my documents. This was in 2018, and I appealed that order. Refused to give Chevron my computer. Chevron had demanded my computer, and he locked me up for 993 days on a misdemeanor, where the previous longest sentence imposed on any lawyer in U.S. history was 90 days of home confinement. I served over 10 times that amount. Of course, the main difference between me and that lawyer who served 90 days is he actually was guilty of something, and I was totally innocent because this was all a bogus case designed to silence me. So, yeah, I mean, part of what they do, and I don't know, Craig, what happened to you exactly, but what they've done to me is they've used the civil side of the justice system to try to grind me down and prevent me from maintaining what perhaps for a lawyer is the most important feature of the profession, which is the ability to maintain confidentiality with his clients. And if you take that away, you can't do the work. No client will want you to be their lawyer. So that was like their little tricked up way to try to force me off the case by basically grinding me down with these procedural rulings that, you know, a lot of people don't have the sophistication to understand the technical aspects of the law. But these people are experts in using technical esoterica to basically destroy lawyers or try to destroy lawyers because they know they have no defense on the merits of the claims being brought against them. That's what they tried to do to me, and to some degree succeeded.
Craig, he just mentioned your case. Steve was the first person ever to actually spend time in jail for this charge. You too were the only person, I think, since the law was passed in the UK or in Scotland, where you went to jail for this esoteric, ridiculous, contempt charge.
Yeah, I'm the only person ever to be jailed anywhere in the world, as far as we know, for jigsaw identification, which is quite an interesting honor. I'm the only journalist to be jailed for contempt since Bernard Falk in the mid-1970s. And the only journalist who's ever had a sentence approaching the length of my sentence for journalism was Bertrand Russell, who was jailed for 6 months during the First World War for writing an anti-war tract. And I, of course, got 8 months, even longer than Bertrand Russell's got. But yeah, I'm absolutely unprecedented. And of course, the other point about my case was that the court ruled that I wasn't entitled to the protections offered to journalists because I was writing on a blog and not writing for a mainstream media publication. And the judge actually said, this is my favorite bit, that the mainstream media are more ethical than bloggers, which I thought was a fascinating judicial observation, which not many people would necessarily agree with.
Steve, you didn't get a lot of support from the mainstream media, did you? I mean, there's a lot of people out there in the blogging world, shows like mine, WBAI and other places, but the mainstream media, which I don't know what that is, but I think it's media that's affiliated with the government.
Well, I'd say the way I'd sort of explain that is, no, I did not get a lot of support from the media that depends on corporate advertising for its survival. I got a lot of support from independent media that is growing and growing here in the United States to the point where I almost feel like I didn't need or even want, coverage from places like the New York Times, which are completely dominated by fossil fuel advertising at this point and simply cannot tell the truth about things that are happening in the world related to the fossil fuel industry, including my detention. So as Craig pointed out, highly unusual, unprecedented that a lawyer, particularly in the United States, is being locked up for doing successful human rights work. And we usually hear about this thing happening in other countries, like Saudi Arabia maybe, or Turkey, Russia, China, United States. Never happened before. Why did the New York Times completely ignore a person? I went to Harvard Law School. I graduated in the same class as President Obama. Okay. I am a credible person. And I was locked up for almost 3 years in my home, a short walk from their newsroom. And they were covering stories appropriately of lawyers in the same situation all over the world. And they ignored the one right under their own, right in front of them, their own newsroom. So, I later found out that the main outside lawyer for the New York Times, Craig, you'll probably be interested to hear this, is a guy named Ted Boutros Jr., who's a partner at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, a big U.S. law firm that was used by Chevron to try to destroy my life. They literally had 150 lawyers working on a case to try to attack me in this civil racketeering case here. And they also represent the New York Times. The New York Times totally ignored the story.
Craig, this story out of Ecuador, this environmental damage that is done by Chevron. You, as a diplomat, when you were in West Africa, you witnessed it firsthand what Shell did in Nigeria. Can you go into that a little bit and the kind of pushback that you got?
Yeah, I was responsible for agriculture and water resources in the British High Commission embassy equivalent in Nigeria way back in the late 1980s. And with my water resources hat on, if you like, I traveled quite a lot around the Niger Delta, and the pollution was just astonishing, to the extent that you could be driving along a main road and suddenly you were driving through a foot of crude oil actually covering the ground as far as you could see and covering the main road. You're driving through floods of crude oil in places, and through chemical waste and God knows what. There were lakes of burning fossil fuel around, and it was just astonishing. Plainly, the Shell in particular, because they were the largest company operating there at the time, but other fossil fuel companies, none of them paid the slightest even lip service to environmental protection. They just didn't care. They were getting out the oil as fast as they possibly could, and any byproducts or whatever were just getting dumped, just tipped off into the nearest convenient sinkhole. It really was absolutely astonishing to witness. It was like a vision of hell. And Shell, of course, were a major British or half British company with a lot of clout. And when I queried the managing director of Shell Nigeria at a meeting where he was claiming things which plainly weren't true, and this was an internal meeting with British diplomats. It wasn't a public meeting. And I quite gently queried a couple of things he'd said, which didn't match at all the reality I'd seen on the ground, and I got told off big time. I got serious rebukes coming from my superiors in London, my superiors in Nigeria, and it was absolutely fascinating. Shell's ability to, if you like, control the British government input into Nigeria and what they were doing there, and the way that Shell and the British government were simply interlocked. And nobody was going to admit this pollution was happening. And at the time, in the 1980s, I'm talking about 1985, it wasn't widely known. It wasn't widely understood the devastation these people were doing.
Well, both of you, you took on a big oil company. Craig's talking about a big oil company. How much control do they have over this environment? And what does that harbinger, augur, for the future of this planet, Steve?
I'll be frank. In my opinion, there is no government in the world that has the power right now to stand up to the fossil fuel industry. It doesn't exist. I've seen it time and again in country after country. There is no government in the world that has the power to stop this industry from destroying our planet. And until we solve that piece of the problem, which in my opinion can only come from citizen pressure, we are going to lose our planet. I've seen this time and again in the United States, where the Democratic Party, which is supposedly the party of the liberals, the left, is completely under the sway of the fossil fuel industry. Sorry, Joe Biden has been so weak on the issue of climate. Barack Obama was also pretty weak on the issue of climate. Of course, it's different than someone like Donald Trump, who was full bore trying to basically destroy any possible regulation of the industry. But the reason we now had a judicial coup in the United States in the last 2 weeks The reason we have basically 6 unelected justices, among other things, preventing the federal government from addressing the climate crisis through their judicial decisions, 6 people, is because, in my opinion, the fossil fuel industry has bought the United States government, and I mean every branch. You know, it used to be the Congress, the executive. Well, now it's also the judiciary. What happened to me is very much a part of that, you know, the private corporate prosecution. So I'm not very sanguine right now. I hate to be this way, but after observing events and seeing, you know, what Craig just described observing, you see these kinds of legacies all over the world. And the reason they happen is because governments have no ability to stop it. There's corruption. There are people in these places that benefit personally from pollution. They get paid off to not regulate, or they're part of the investment. And the people who pay the price are the population. It's the taxpayers of those countries. I mean, think about it. In Ecuador's case, Chevron dumped 16 billion gallons of cancer-causing waste in the Amazon and then fled town. Okay, who's going to pay for that cleanup? Well, Chevron thinks they're not going to pay. So that means the people who live there or the country itself has to pay. So what Chevron essentially got is a taxpayer-funded bailout of its pollution from the very people it poisoned. So these major polluters continue to do this kind of horrid, you know, I think criminal activity, these operational practices that basically offload the toxic waste onto the most vulnerable communities, often indigenous communities. And they're going to continue doing it until there's some entity strong enough to stop it. I mean, we tried in Ecuador and we succeeded to some degree. Like, we won the case. They haven't paid, and they basically figured out a way to prosecute me. Chevron did, in the name of the U.S. government, put me in, you know, in detention for 993 days. So we need to do better. And I think the only solution is citizen action, forcing governments to do what they need to be doing to regulate and control this out of control industry.
Craig, are you just as pessimistic as Steve?
I am. I certainly agree with the analysis. I'm not entirely pessimistic. There are a few organisations dominated by young people. There's one in the UK at the moment called Stop Oil. But there's a young gentleman who's only 20, I think, from Stop Oil, just been jailed for several weeks in Scotland for demonstrating. And these people are blockading oil refineries and blockading motorways and generally taking direct action on quite a large scale. It's not a few dozen people, and they're growing fast, and we're seeing more and more of this kind of environmental activism from young people here. And that gives me a certain amount of hope. It also gives me a certain amount of hope that the reaction to that hasn't been unanimous condemnation. 10 years ago, young people were blockading an oil refinery, young people were lying down on a motorway and closing the motorway. Then if you look, you know, the comments of the newspapers and the general public reaction would have been very negative. Who are these stupid young people? How dare they inconvenience people at petrol stations? How dare they inconvenience people on motorways? And there's still an element of that. The mainstream media, in particular, always try and say they've blocked a motorway. What if an ambulance is carrying somebody with a heart attack to hospital? They have blocked the they're always trying to twist everything in an extremely negative fashion. But in general, I have been happily surprised by how much public support now there is for direct action targeted at the fossil fuel industry, because I think we're now at a stage where people can see climate change, where it's not possible to deny climate change, because although one incident is anecdotal, by the time you've seen several thousand incidents, that's no longer anecdotal, that plainly is evidence. And I do think we're on the cusp of a public revolt. That doesn't change the fact that the fossil fuel companies still have the money and still control those in power. But I'm not pessimistic about the hope that popular revolt will eventually bring this thing down within our lifetimes. And it will have to be within our lifetimes, because any later than that would be far too late.
All right. This is Randy Critical live on the fly, Assange Countdown to Freedom. We're going to turn now in a moment, come back and talk about the case of Julian Assange with these two whistleblowers, these two courageous, extraordinary individuals, Craig Murray and Steve Donziger. We're going to play Humoresque and come right back and talk about the case of Julian Assange. All right, Randy Critical live on the fly, Assange Countdown to Freedom. I'm going to go to you, Steve, first. I mean, you have been bogged down for years with your case, and I know when that happens, it's very difficult to really see what's going on around the world. But you have spoken. I've seen you at events now for Assange. What is your assessment? Look at your case and look at his case. You said you were just going up against the biggest oil company in the world. He's going up against the entire national security establishment.
Well, just real quick on a previous answer, I don't want to leave you with too much pessimism. I agree with Craig. Like, I do think we can deal with the climate crisis, but it's got to be through citizen action. It's not going to come from governments without responding to pressure. So, and there are so many people organizing, young people in particular, that I salute and I encourage and I love, and I'm in solidarity, and I'm out there too, and we can do this. We can do this, but we do have to recognize the reality of the forces that are out there that are trying to block that kind of movement from succeeding. But we can do it. So I want to just mention that real quick. In terms of Julian, I don't think there's ever been a more abhorrent, illegal kind of attack by the U.S. government on a journalist in the history of our country. I mean, you know, Craig can relate because the same thing happened to him, you know, and I can relate because to some degree it's happening to me. I mean, even though I'm a lawyer, I'm advocating, right, for a check on corporate power. You know, Julian's advocating for a check on governmental abuse, on war crimes committed by the U.S. government. He's an innocent man. He's done nothing wrong. He did a lot right. And for that, he's being retaliated against. But the extent of suffering that the U.S. government and its allies are trying to inflict on him is just unlike almost anything I've ever seen. And, you know, what happened to me, it was tough as hell, man. It was painful to be stuck in my house in prison for almost 3 years for being a successful lawyer. But I cannot imagine what Julian must be going through in the harshest prison, you know, the toughest prison in the UK. He's being tortured, as Nils Meltzer pointed out in his report, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. And of course, the fact the Biden administration is, you know, indicted him on espionage. I mean, the case is crazy. But what it does show is the extent to which Julian was successful in his work as a journalist, as a publisher. It shows the extent to which the U.S. government is in decline. I mean, you know, any government that has to take those kinds of measures against a truth teller is feeling seriously insecure. It's significant abuse of power. And as in my case, I think the only way to really save Julian is for people to become aware of it, organize, and demand his freedom. You know, Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself, in my opinion. I mean, Barack Obama, for all his challenges and all his faults, at least refused to go in this direction. He recognized that what Julian did is the same thing the New York Times historically has done on multiple occasions to expose government abuse, including, for example, in a case having to do with the Pentagon Papers. You know, so this is just wrong. And, you know, what I believe my case and Julian's have in common, and maybe Craig's case as well, is we all have challenged entrenched interests of power that engage in corrupt practices. And when you become too visible doing that, this kind of thing tends to happen. And, you know, the point, obviously, is not only to silence those people doing it, but to intimidate others who might think about doing this kind of work. And we can't let that happen. So I think about Julian all the time. I think it's just unbelievable what's happening to him.
Before I go to you, Craig, to respond or add on to that, I want to play this clip that Kelly Lane, our engineer and editor, picked up yesterday. And then you comment on that and whatever else Steve just said.
The first casualty of war is the truth. But the attack on the truth by war begins long before war starts and continues long after a war ends. In our release of these 400,000 documents about the Iraq War, the intimate detail of that war from the US perspective, we hope to correct some of that attack on the truth that occurred before the war, during the war, and which has continued on since the war officially concluded.
Craig?
I mean, one thing that really takes me back is seeing Julian as he looked when I first really knew him, and comparing that to how he looks now. Because, you know, because of the conditions he's held in jail, he looks 25, 30 years older when he's actually only 10 years older. You know, you've seen him, Randy. He's stooped, he's shambling, he's limping, he's not able to focus. It really emotionally knocks me quite back to see him, you know, as he is and should be, and I pray he will be again. It's quite a remarkable thing that journalism is treated as espionage. I mean, it's astonishing. In terms of the normal linguistic understanding of what the word espionage means, there's no way anything he did was remotely espionage. And it's always, I mean, I myself have been both sides of this, because I published official secrets and I was an ambassador, I was a government insider who leaked official secrets. In terms of being somebody who leaks official secrets, in my case about torture and extraordinary rendition, you're taking a moral stance and you accept that you are breaking the law in order to take your moral stance. And you accept as part of that the risk you will go to jail. And hopefully you won't, because hopefully the public interest of what you did might prevail. But for a whistleblower who leaks material, there's a risk you will go to jail. And of course, Chelsea Manning was appallingly treated for having revealed war crimes, but Chelsea Manning suffered for having leaked the material. But I mean, the material which I leaked was published by The Guardian. I would have been astonished if the editor of The Guardian had been jailed for having published what I leaked to The Guardian. That would have been incredible. I think everyone would have been astonished by that. It's the whistleblower who's taking on themselves the moral responsibility, not the journalist who publishes. And Julian is a journalist who published material that was leaked to them, and the idea that journalists are going to be prevented from ever publishing any information the government does not want you to know, no matter who gives it to them, no matter how true it is terrifying. All we will have left are official government mouthpieces, and not to be an official government mouthpiece will be a crime. That's what the future is if this prosecution of Julian holds.
You know, I always for the last at least 6 months been every one of these shows we play this clip which of course rankled the powers that be. And this is what Julian really is being prosecuted for. Could you play that short clip from Collateral Murder?
One shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Bushmaster 2-6. Bushmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals. Yeah, we got 2 birds. We're still firing. Roger. Got him.
6 is a 2-6. We'll move, but we got this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I was on.
Bypass.
God damn it, Kyle. All right. I hit him by head.
Steve, if you're there, you just saw that clip, Steve. What's your visceral response to it, and the kind of indignation you might have? The fact that those guys are still on the loose and not being pursued by Merrick Garland, but the guy who showed it is.
I mean, I don't know what to say. You know, Merrick Garland is, look, I believe there are structures of government that protect, obviously in the U.S., the national security state. It doesn't mean individuals can't make a big difference. I think the Attorney General is a position that could make a big difference. I think Merrick Garland could make a big difference. He knows better. The fact he fails to act, to me, is a sign of weakness and a lack of fiber. He failed to act in my case. I mean, he basically let a private corporation engage in a criminal prosecution in his name, in the name of his agency, the Department of Justice. You know, why didn't he stop it? You know, we asked him time and time again. Thousands and thousands of people send him emails. So I'm not impressed with Merrick Garland. I believe that, you know, he has the power, the authority, the ability to take action in all of these cases. Julian's case, my case, and Jessica Resnicek, a lovely climate activist who engaged in an act of civil disobedience against an oil pipeline, a private oil pipeline, and was designated a terrorist by a federal judge for doing that. You know, so he hasn't acted in that case. So I'm not impressed with Merrick Garland. I think that it is, you know, a vivid illustration of the contradictions, isn't it?
Yeah.
That he would go after the person who exposed that and not go after the people who inflicted that kind of crime on innocent people.
Craig Murray?
No, I think that's true. I mean, the only people to have been jailed for the war crimes that were exposed are Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, who were jailed for revealing the war crime, not for carrying them out. It seems to me that this is simply indefensible. Absolutely astonishing.
I want to play this. This happens to be William Kunstler's birthday today, and I know you've seen this before, Steve, and you've tweeted it out. And it's Bill Kunstler's birthday, and I think what he's saying here applies to not Julian's case, but your cases as well. And we'll talk about this. Is like a minute and a half long, so bear with me. This is William Kunstler after the Chicago 7, Chicago 8 trials and the convictions.
And that's the terrible myth of organized society, that everything that's done through the established system is legal, and that word has a powerful psychological impact. It makes people believe that there is an order to life and an order to a system, and that a person that goes through this order and is convicted has gotten all that is due him. And therefore society can turn its conscience off and look to other things and other times. And that's the terrible thing about these past trials, is that they have this aura of legitimacy, this aura of legality. I suspect that better men than the world has known, and more of them, have gone to their death through a legal system than through all the illegalities in the history of man. 6 million people in Europe during the Third Reich? Legal. Sacco Vanzetti? Quite legal. The Haymarket defendants? Legal. The hundreds of rape trials throughout the South, where black men were condemned to death? All legal. Jesus? Legal. Socrates? Legal. And that is the kaleidoscopic nature of what we live through here and in other places. Because all tyrants learn that it is far better to do this thing through some semblance of legality than to do it without that pretense.
I'm going to go to you first, Craig. I know I've had Steve has commented on this before. As you look at that, what is your thoughts and your impressions of what he's saying there?
Yeah, I'm sorry I never knew him, because what a tremendously articulate and charismatic individual. And yes, of course, that's true. And I felt it so strongly when watching Julian at his trial. And if you recall, Randy, because you were sitting next to me on some of those occasions, he was in a glass box at the back of the court, and he couldn't hear. He couldn't hear what was being. He couldn't hear the proceedings in his own trial, and he couldn't give instructions to his lawyer. He was having to desperately flap his arms or bang on the glass or attempt to, it was, and seeing him there locked in that little glass box, and knowing that he would be strip searched, on both times coming in and going out of the court, and it was a terrifying realization that what the state is engaged in is violence. This is violence against a human being. This person is being confined, is being humiliated, is being stripped, and this is violence by the state with a veneer of civilization on top. What you're seeing is horrible violence and possibly fatal violence being enacted upon somebody in a very formalized manner, by controlling their movements, controlling to an extreme degree the space they're allowed to be in. And of course, if they try to move outside that space, actual violence, real violence will be visited upon them. The realization of the sheer brutality of the state. And this is what Nils Melzer captures so well in his description of what's happening to Julian as torture. Realizing that this whole structure of so-called justice is actually ultimately about the physical control and imposition of violence on individuals by those in power. And I think that's precisely what in a more methodical and articulate way William Constable was talking about there.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve, jump in there.
Well, that's one of my favorite speeches of all time. I've tweeted it a couple of times. It's so applicable, isn't it, to all of our situations? It's what the corrupt corporations and governments are now doing, which is trying to clothe their illegal actions in the law to make it look legal. And I think what Bill Kunstler points out is really important. When they call it legal, most people believe it to be correct. And you can't assume that. And in my case, I think in Craig's case, and obviously in Julian's case, legal actions were taken that were really fundamentally illegal and wrong. So people need to wake up and understand that just because something is called legal doesn't mean it's right. Worse, I think these entities are trying to use the credibility of the word and of the law in abusive ways to target people illegally. And we have to be really vigilant about that. Half the battle is just noticing it when it happens. It's so easy to miss when a court case comes out, it's so easy to miss what really happened if you just read in the newspaper, oh, a judge decided X and Y. You just assume, okay, well, that's the decision. No, that's actually should be the beginning of the critical analysis that takes place. So I salute Bill Kunstler, who's always been a hero of mine. I grew up as a lawyer admiring him.
Craig, we only have 4 or 5 minutes left. If you have any questions, or you, Steve, to Craig, to Steve, I wanted to give you some time together. If there's anything that you'd like to ask.
Well, I just add to the last thing that although I never knew Bill Kunstler, his former wife, Margaret, was one of the people who very kindly travelled to Scotland to visit me in jail. Which
that's right.
Which was very, very good of her. She flew to Scotland specially to do that, and I was deeply honoured. There's also because she was able to do that as a lawyer, because I was not allowed visitors. I think I had over a 4-month period. I had a total of 3 visits from my family, I think, and I wasn't. But I could see legal counsel, and so she came to see me in her capacity as a lawyer, but really, as an expression of solidarity, and that is a kind. I'd like to say one thing that characterizes what happened to you and what happened to me, and so far what has happened to Julian, is that none of us had a jury. We all spent all this time in jail or in confinement with no jury. I personally think that I would have been very, very unlikely to go to jail had there been a jury of honest men and women deliberating on it. And I suspect you think that's the same in your case as well. And I'm interested in your thoughts as to the extension, the validity of the extension of juries into other kinds of trials, because they certainly here the process is going the other way. Juries are being used less and less in trials, and the old safeguard of being judged by honest citizens and your peers seems to be, unless you've actually killed someone, it's very hard to get hold of that safeguard nowadays. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Very true. Fewer and fewer juries. In Chevron's case, in my opinion, they will not do a case with a jury. It's too risky. They'd rather not do the case, but of course there's all sorts of ways to get rid of juries. In my case, they sued me for $60 billion initially, and to avoid a jury, they dropped every penny of the damages claim just before trial, and it was run by a judge who is a member of the Federalist Society and has investments in Chevron and represented the tobacco industry, and he reverse engineered the process to find me liable under civil laws based on fake evidence. And then fast forward to my criminal contempt case, same thing happened. The U.S. Constitution says when you're charged with a crime, you're entitled to a jury. Well, there's a trick they've invented, the judges have, that if they agree to keep your sentence to 6 months or less, they don't have to give you a jury. That's just illegal, but it's become the practice. And so I got denied a jury. And again, I don't think a jury would, like you, I don't believe a jury would have found me liable for anything or convicted me of anything. So the only way they get away with it is to control it through judges who are sympathetic and to them and who don't do their duty, don't adhere to their duty to be neutral. It's the only way they can do these cases and accomplish their objectives. Otherwise, they won't do them. But it's very easy to get rid of juries now because of what I earlier said is their increasing power of these corporations and governments to control the judiciary. So I think you point out a very key issue. I don't think Julian Assange, ever would have been in this position that he had a jury. But what I predict they will do to him, unless they stop this craziness, is they will try him in a jurisdiction with very right-wing people in Northern Virginia, where all the CIA is and the NSA. And the judge will control who gets on the jury, and it essentially will be rigged anyway. In other words, we'll get a jury, but it won't be a fair and impartial jury. And it's also controlled by the judges blocking evidence from coming in. They will block evidence sympathetic to him and let in all the evidence that the government wants to put in. So you end up with a completely skewed picture, one-sided picture, so that the so-called jury makes a decision without all the information. So there's all sorts of procedural tricks judges use, even when there is a jury, to rig the outcome. So, we just need to be cognizant of this. I'm going to be writing about it and calling attention to it as it unfolds.
Craig, where are we here at this point in time? I mean, I know that Priti Patel signed the order. It could be imminent. Is there is an appeal for the underlying conviction? But how do you foresee? Are you optimistic? Is there any possible way that he will get through this in the immediate future?
Well, the British government has just fallen today, which may be some room for optimism. But an appeal has now been lodged to the High Court, because if you recall, what happened was initially on about 6 different counts, the magistrate ruled in favor of the United States, and solely on the medical count, medical and the interaction of his medical condition and US prison conditions. On that count alone, she forbade the extradition. And the American government then appealed against that ruling on that single count and won. So the extradition was then ordered to proceed. But Julian still hasn't appealed on the 6 points that he lost at in the initial judgment. And the appeal against those points has now just been submitted to the High Court. And those are the basic freedom of speech arguments, freedom of journalism arguments, the lack of any credible evidence, the question of whether the things he's accused of are crimes in the United Kingdom, which has to be a precedent for extradition, and the ban on political extradition in the US-UK extradition treaty, and whether that ban on political extradition covers this case. So all those points, which are much more fundamental points, are now appealed to the High Court. If the High Court refuses to take the appeal, then theoretically he could be extradited extremely quickly. Although there's still a possibility of a last-minute appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. But theoretically, things could happen very, very quickly. But the High Court tomorrow could say, no, we're turning down the appeal. We're not going to hear the appeal. There are no valid grounds for appeal. And Monday, he could be on the plane. I mean, theoretically, things could unfold that fast. I don't expect that to happen. I expect the High Court will hear the appeal. And that will then take us into another appeal process. It will take up the best part of a year or more.
Craig, it's so nice to meet you, my friend. Keep up the great work. Randy, thank you for giving us the opportunity, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
We're going to play something out.
Lovely to meet you.
This is the bar, and this is our good buddy, Roger Waters, who just opened last night in Pittsburgh, and I know it was a political concert because I got a little foretaste of it. But before we get to that, Craig, just some final thoughts here. What we haven't spoken about on Assange, just kind of a little summation to go out with.
Yeah, well, I think it needs saying that Julian Assange is the greatest journalist and publisher of our age, and Julian revolutionized public understanding of government and public access to information, and the way that could be democratized via the internet. Julian is a revolutionary thinker, and by any criteria, one of the great thinkers of this age. And the fact that governments are contriving to destroy the life of somebody like that. Earlier, Stephen mentioned Socrates, and I think that's actually a very good parallel. It doesn't bear thinking. To me, it's just hard to believe this is all really happening.
All right, we've been talking to Craig Murray, former ambassador to the UK, Poland, high diplomat. What's it called? High Commission in Western Africa. You can read about it in the Catholic Orangeman in Togo, which you just tweeted about. You said that was your favorite book, Craig.
Yeah, I think so, because there are bits which are intensely sad. You know, particularly the bits about people who became war criminals, who became mass murderers, but who from the age of 6 or 7 had been brought up as child soldiers and never had fought in conflicts, been shipped all over Africa, fought in civil wars, never had a chance in life, and yet then faced execution as war criminals themselves, having done other things. And there are individuals I met and got to know in that category, and their stories will make you cry. I mean, they make me cry when I think about them. And then there are a number of absolutely disastrous episodes in my personal life and my love life in particular, which I've recounted in I hope humorous fashion. So the book, and many people have said to me, you know, the book makes you laugh and makes you cry, and that's life. That's our life as we go through. Sometimes we're laughing, sometimes we're crying.
Well, I would say the same thing about Murder at Samarkand. That is a tremendous memoir on your life in Uzbekistan. And then, of course, folks, if you get a chance, you've got to read, and it's got to be made into a movie. It's called Sikandar Burns, and it's about leading up to the first Anglo-Afghan War of 1841, I believe. That is really a tremendous piece of work. Craig Murray, thank you for all that you do. You've been very generous to this show. I want to thank the folks out there. Steve Donziger, thank you. And we're going to go out with Roger Waters. But don't go away, Craig, because I want to say goodbye to you.
Okay.
Does everybody in the bar feel shame? Lord knows I do. I guess we all feel pretty much the same. Kind of wore out by this crazy fucking zoo. The smell of napalm with the cornflakes, the chafe of killing everything that breathes, imposing sanctions on the lady down the street. Till she takes the hint and packs her bags and leaves. Come on in here, sister, and set a spell. You are most welcome in the bar. We may seem few, but we are many. Have you been traveling for? The girl who brought you in here is Lakota from Standing Rock, where they made their stand. So from Fort Yates, North Dakota, here's a message for the man. Would you kindly get the fuck off our land?